The galaxy had conquered itself into boredom. For nearly 1,000 cycles, the Kruan ascendancy had expanded without resistance worthy of memory. System after system folded into compliance, not through slaughter, but through inevitability. Their fleets did not rage. They arrived, demonstrated superiority, and waited. Every species understood the lesson. The Kruan did not lose. They optimized. To the ascendancy, war was a solved equation. Variables were cataloged. Outcomes predicted. Entire civilizations could be measured, modeled, and subdued before the first ship ever crossed into their skies. It was efficient, elegant, boring. So when long-range scouts detected a noisy little star system on the galactic fringe, one leaking radio chatter, primitive nuclear signatures, and wildly inefficient propulsion, the data barely earned a footnote. Sol system, third planet inhabited. Species designation, Terran. Technological tier, pre-unified, pre-FTL. Threat probability, negligible. The scouts laughed, not cruelly, not with malice, but with the tired amusement of predators watching prey trip over its own feet. Terran strategy documents were intercepted within hours of first contact. That alone should have been a warning. The files were chaotic, contradictory, filled with contingency plans layered atop other contingency plans, many of which directly contradicted one another. There was no single doctrine, no unified philosophy of war, just options. So many options. The Kruan analysts dismissed it as inefficiency. Lack of central optimization, one tactician noted. Emotional decision-making, said another. Primitive reliance on attrition, concluded the war calculus core. Their invasion models ran millions of simulations. In every one of them, Earth fell. On Earth, no one laughed. When the first Kruan fleet translated into the outer system, humanity did not greet it with bravado or panic. There were no speeches broadcast to the stars. No threats issued. Instead, people went very quiet. Old generals reread ancient texts. Engineers dusted off forgotten schematics. Farmers watched the night sky and wondered whether they should plant one more season, just in case. And in a subterranean command center beneath a mountain range that had already survived 3 wars, Admiral Elias Crow stared at a tactical display that refused to make sense. "They're lining up," a junior officer said. "Perfect formation. No deviation." Crow nodded slowly. "Of course they are," he murmured. The officer hesitated. "Sir, that's bad, isn't it?" Crow didn't answer right away, because perfect formation only mattered if you expected a clean fight. The Kruan did not bother with deception. They did not need it. Their lead vessel entered high orbit and transmitted a single galaxy-standard message, translated automatically into every Terran language. "Inhabitants of Sol 3, your resistance is unnecessary. Your strategies are outdated. Your defeat is mathematically assured." The message paused, as if considering something. "You may surrender now to preserve infrastructure." That was it. No countdown, no threats, no drama, just certainty. Across the ascendancy, commanders observed Earth's response with detached curiosity. They expected chaos. They expected disorganized retaliation. They expected fear. What they got was delay. No immediate counterstrike. No unified surrender. No grand gesture at all. Human military assets repositioned, but strangely, fleets dispersed instead of consolidating. Ground forces evacuated major population centers without explanation. Supply depots were abandoned, then quietly dismantled. The Kruan flagged it as panic behavior. "They're scattering," one observer noted. "Inefficient." The Ascendancy fleet advanced. The first engagement was almost insulting. A Kruan strike group descended toward Earth's orbital defenses. Ancient satellites, outdated rail platforms, systems decades behind galactic standards. Terran cannons fired. They missed. Badly. Rounds went wide. Targeting solutions lagged. Several platforms overloaded and detonated harmlessly into space. Kruan commanders recorded the exchange for training archives. "This is what unoptimized warfare looks like," one of them said dryly. Within minutes, Earth's orbital layer was gone. The Ascendancy did not lose a single ship. They laughed. On Earth, Admiral Crow watched the same footage. He leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "Good," he said. The room went still. The captain turned toward him. "Sir, good." Crow nodded, eyes never leaving the screen. "They're exactly where we wanted them." The Kruan began their descent operations with confidence bordering on boredom. Ground forces deployed in open formations, shields overlapping with mathematical precision. Their walkers moved in clean lines across continents, projecting force without urgency. There was no resistance. Cities lay empty, highways abandoned, factories silent. "This world is already broken," a Kruan field commander remarked. "They've fled." But that was the first mistake. Humans hadn't fled. They had stepped aside. Hours later, the first anomaly appeared. A Kruan supply convoy vanished en route to a forward base. No distress signal, no wreckage, no energy spike. Simply stopped reporting. Analysts blamed terrain interference. Then another convoy disappeared. Then a third. Commanders requested aerial reconnaissance. Drones were dispatched. Only half returned. Those that did carried corrupted data. Static-laced visuals of empty roads, burned-out vehicles, and strange obstacles deliberately placed where none should exist. "This makes no sense," one tactician muttered. The War Calculus Corps ran new simulations. They all still predicted victory, but the timelines began to slip. On the outskirts of a ruined city, a Kruan patrol advanced through streets too quiet to trust. "Scans are clear," one soldier said. Another tilted its head. "Too clear." They never saw the trigger. The explosion didn't come from above or ahead, but from beneath. The street collapsed, swallowing armored units into a void packed with crude explosives, steel spikes, and collapsing concrete. No energy weapons, no advanced tech, just gravity and timing. From a distant rooftop, a Terran observer whispered into a radio. "Trap sprung." Across the invasion zone, similar reports flooded in. Ambushes with no discernible pattern. Attacks that sacrificed terrain, infrastructure, even human-held ground, just to eliminate a handful of Ascendancy units. The Kruan were winning every engagement and losing the war. A senior commander reviewed casualty projections with growing irritation. "These losses are inefficient," he snapped. "Why do they keep engaging this way?" An analyst hesitated. "They are not fighting for territory." "Then for what?" The analyst swallowed. "To control where we move." The commander stared at the display. Humans weren't contesting space. They were shaping it. Back in the Mountain Command Center, Admiral Crow listened to reports with grim satisfaction. "They're laughing at us," a lieutenant said bitterly. Crow allowed himself a thin smile. "Good," he replied again. "Let them." He leaned forward. "Because they still think this is about winning." And far above Earth, the Kruan Ascendancy, masters of optimized war, advanced deeper into a battlefield they did not understand. A battlefield where nothing was accidental, where failure was anticipated, and where every step forward brought them closer to something tightening around them, something patient, something human. The Kruan Ascendancy prided itself on adaptation. Every conquered species had, at some point, attempted resistance. Some fought with desperation, others with innovation. A few even surprised the Ascendancy with clever tactics that delayed the inevitable. None of it mattered. The Ascendancy always adjusted. So when Terran resistance failed to collapse after orbital dominance was secured, the response was not fear but annoyance. A recalculation. Command nodes across the invasion theater lit with updated projections. Terrain maps were refined. Human population centers were cross-referenced with logistics pathways. The War Calculus Corps adjusted casualty allowances upward by a negligible margin. Victory timelines extended by 3.2%. Acceptable. Deploy suppression sweeps, ordered High Commander Varesh. Flush remaining resistance. This ends now. The Kruan advanced. And once again, the humans vanished. Cities that should have offered cover were empty shells. Subterranean scans detected caverns, tunnels, and infrastructure far older than any modern Terran construction. Repurposed, reinforced, expanded. Humanity had been digging into its own world long before the Ascendancy ever existed. That too went unremarked. Primitive burrowing, one officer said dismissively. But primitive did not mean ineffective. The suppression sweeps moved street by street, valley by valley, and every time the Kruan committed fully to an advance, the ground itself seemed to resist. Bridges collapsed under vehicles precisely when load tolerances peaked. Roads funneled armored columns into narrow corridors where fields of fire appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. Human attacks were brief, messy, and devastating. They did not attempt to hold positions. They struck, then disappeared. "Why don't they defend?" a junior commander asked. Varesh's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Because they know they cannot." That was the second mistake. From a ridge overlooking a scorched plain, Captain Mira Lawson watched through binoculars as a Kruan formation advanced with mechanical grace. Perfect spacing, overlapping shield coverage, predictable tension arcs. "They really like their geometry," her spotter muttered. Lawson nodded. "They think war is a diagram." She pressed her radio. Phase 2. Now. The ridge exploded. Not from explosives, but from gravity. A network of buried charges collapsed the hillside inward, turning solid ground into a flowing mass of stone and dust. Kruan walkers lost footing. Shield harmonics faltered under stresses they were never designed to counter. And then the humans opened fire. Kinetic rounds, chemical explosives, weapons so crude the Ascendancy had stopped modeling them centuries ago. But they worked, because shields tuned to energy signatures did nothing against raw mass and momentum. When the dust settled, the humans were gone. Again, Varesh slammed a claw against the command rail. "They are baiting us." "Yes, Commander," an analyst replied carefully. "But their losses remain unsustainable." Varesh stared at the casualty reports. Human losses were staggering. Entire Terran units sacrificed themselves to slow advances by minutes, sometimes seconds. "That level of attrition is irrational," Varesh growled. The analyst hesitated. "They appear unconcerned with proportional survival." Varesh turned slowly. "No species is unconcerned with survival." The analyst did not respond. On Earth, the cost was written everywhere. Burned cities, blackened forests, fields turned to ash. Hospitals overflowed with wounded soldiers and civilians alike. Supplies ran thin. Power flickered. And still people stayed. In a field hospital lit by generators, a young medic worked through exhaustion, hands stained with blood that never quite washed away. "You should rest," a nurse said softly. The medic shook her head. "If they're still out there," she replied, "then so am I." The Kruan finally captured a Terran soldier alive. The event was treated as an anomaly. The prisoner was brought before Commander Varesh, restrained but unbroken. "You cannot win," Varesh said calmly. "Your strategies are inefficient. Your losses unsustainable." The human looked up. "We know." Varesh paused. "Then why continue?" The human smiled faintly. "Because you're still here." The implication lingered. Varesh dismissed the prisoner, but the question followed him long after. As the invasion deepened, something unsettling became impossible to ignore. Terran attacks were not random. They were patterned not spatially but psychologically. The humans struck where overconfidence gathered, where formations were most pristine, where commanders trusted models instead of instinct. "They're studying us," one officer said quietly. Varesh's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. We have centuries of data." "Yes," the officer replied, "but they're collecting something else." "What?" The officer swallowed. "Reactions." The War Calculus Corps began flagging inconsistencies. Kruan units behaved predictably under stress. Humans exploited that. Every retreat drew pursuit. Every ambush taught a lesson. The Ascendancy was being trained, and it did not know how to stop. High above, in orbit, the invasion fleet repositioned to tighten control. That was when the third anomaly occurred. Long-range sensors detected movement, slow, unguided, and numerous. Objects drifting outward from Earth's gravity well. Debris, scrap, derelict satellites. The fleet dismissed it as environmental clutter, until the first collision tore through a frigate's external sensor spine. Then another ship lost propulsion. The debris field was not random. It had been released. "Clear the area," Varesh ordered. "We cannot," came the reply. "The mass distribution is chaotic." Humanity had thrown trash into the sky and turned space itself into a hazard. Back on Earth, Admiral Crow watched the orbital feed with grim focus. "They're trying to tighten their grip," an aide said. Crow nodded. "And every time they do, they expose something." He leaned closer to the display. "They think control means compression." He smiled thinly. "We know it means fragility." As days turned into weeks, the laughter stopped. Karuan commanders no longer joked during briefings. Casualty reports grew longer. Victory projections stretched further into the future. And always, just beyond every calculation, there was humanity. Bleeding, enduring, refusing to break. High Commander Varesh stood alone in the observation chamber, staring down at a burning world that should have surrendered. For the first time in his career, doubt crept into his thoughts. Not fear, but something worse, uncertainty. Because for the first time, the ascendancy was no longer advancing cleanly. It was being led, step by step, into something the humans had prepared long before the first ship arrived. The Karuan ascendancy had never feared prolonged conflict. Time favored empires. Time eroded resistance, thinned resolve. It turned defiance into exhaustion, and exhaustion into surrender. Entire civilizations had collapsed not from decisive blows, but from the slow certainty that victory would never come. That was how wars ended. Until Earth. By the fourth week of the invasion, Karuan projections began to drift. Not wildly, not catastrophically, but enough to unsettle those who read them. Human resistance was supposed to taper off as infrastructure failed and morale collapsed. Instead, attacks became more precise, less frequent, but more disruptive. Supply convoys vanished along routes deemed secure. Command relays failed in regions considered pacified. Forward bases came under sudden, violent assault, and then silence. Each incident taken alone was insignificant. Together, they formed a pattern the war calculus core could not resolve. "This is inefficient," Varesh said, staring at a rotating projection of the conflict zone. "Yes," replied the strategist beside him, "but efficiency does not appear to be their goal." Varesh turned slowly. "Then what is?" The strategist hesitated. "To control us." On Earth, that control was being earned with blood. Major Elias Grant crouched beside a crater where a Terran artillery unit had once stood. Smoke drifted lazily upward, carrying the scent of burned metal and earth. "They'll advance through here," a lieutenant said. "They always do." Grant nodded. "Because this looks like a win." He keyed his radio. "Let them take it." The lieutenant frowned. "Sir." Grant met his eyes. "They need victories," he said quietly. "So we're going to give them some." The Karuan advanced into the basin exactly as projected. Human forces fell back in apparent disarray. Equipment was abandoned. Defensive lines broke. Varesh watched the feeds with renewed confidence. "There," he said. "They are fracturing." Then the basin detonated. Not from below, but from within. Abandoned Terran vehicles ignited simultaneously, their reactors overloaded by simple mechanical timers. The blast was not devastating, but it collapsed the basin walls inward, trapping Karuan units in a ring of fire and falling stone. Human artillery opened up from miles away, not to destroy, to contain. The Karuan escaped barely. Varesh's mandibles tightened. "They sacrificed an entire formation," he snarled. "Yes," the strategist replied, "to delay us by 17 minutes. Varesh froze. 17 minutes? Yes. 17 minutes mattered, because 17 minutes was enough time for something else to happen. Far above the battlefield, a Terran freighter, civilian unarmed, drifted across a narrow orbital lane. This transponder broadcast distress. The Kruan moved to intercept and flew directly into a cloud of metallic debris released days earlier. Fragments pierced shield seams. Sensors went dark. Thrusters failed. The freighter detonated, not violently, but deliberately, dispersing more mass into the lane. The Kruan cruiser limped away. Varesh stared at the aftermath. "They're not attacking strength," he said slowly. "They're attacking momentum." The realization spread uneasily through the command hierarchy. Human forces were not trying to defeat the ascendancy outright. They were slowing it, bleeding it, teaching it bad habits. Every Terran retreat was measured. Every loss bought time. Every ambush altered Kruan responses just enough to create new vulnerabilities. "They're forcing us to commit," an officer said, "and then punishing us for doing so." Captured Terran communications painted a disturbing picture. There were no speeches about victory, no declarations of final stands, just logistics, timetables, fallback points, names crossed out and replaced. The humans were planning for loss, accepting it, weaponizing it. In a subterranean command center, General Naomi Reyes addressed a room filled with tired faces. "We are not winning," she said plainly. No one argued, but neither are they. She gestured to a projected map of Kruan supply lines. "They need clean routes, clean data, clean control." She tapped the display. "We give them none." A hand rose. "How long can we keep this up?" Reyes met the question without flinching. "As long as it takes for them to realize they can't scare us into stopping." The ascendancy attempted escalation. Precision orbital strikes targeted known Terran fallback zones. Entire regions were rendered uninhabitable in seconds. The response was not panic. It was redistribution. Human populations flowed away from centralized shelters into smaller, harder-to-track groups. Rural zones became hubs of resistance. Cities became empty shells, booby-trapped with nothing worth conquering. Varesh watched reports scroll endlessly. "They are dissolving," he muttered. "No," the strategist replied. "They are spreading." The first real doubt struck when a Kruan forward commander requested withdrawal. Varesh summoned him immediately. "You are ordered to advance." The commander hesitated, a grave breach of protocol. "With respect, High Commander, advancing no longer brings control." Varesh leaned forward. "What brings control, then?" The commander's voice dropped. "Understanding them." Varesh dismissed him, but the words lingered. On Earth, understanding came at a terrible price. Captain Lawson stood at the edge of a ravine, watching smoke rise from a village that no longer existed. Her unit was down to half strength. "Orders?" her second asked. Lawson closed her eyes briefly. "We hold until nightfall," she said. "Then we vanish. And if they push?" Lawson loaded her rifle. "Then we teach them why." That night the Kruan pushed, and lost 2 platoons to traps built from rope, gravity, and human patience. No advanced tech, no elegance, just inevitability turned against itself. By the end of the month, the War Calculus Corps issued its first unprecedented alert. Error outcome convergence failed. Varesh stared at the message. "How is that possible?" The strategist answered quietly. "They are changing faster than we can predict." Varesh clenched his claws. "No species does that." The strategist met his gaze. "They do." The laughter that had once filled Ascendancy command halls was gone. In its place was silence, calculation, and a growing, uncomfortable awareness that humanity was not reacting to invasion. They were conducting one, not against ships, not against armies, but against the very assumptions that had built the Kruan ascendancy. High Commander Varesh stood before the projection of Earth once more. It burned, it bled, and still it resisted. For the first time, Varesh wondered, not whether the ascendancy could win, but what winning would even mean. The Kruan ascendancy did not panic. empires did not panic. They recalibrated. High Command issued a doctrine revision across every invasion front. The War Calculus Corps was partially isolated, its predictive authority reduced. Decisions were returned to living commanders, experienced, disciplined, unquestioning. Human unpredictability, the Council reasoned, was a temporary distortion. Strip away the variables. Force uniform responses. Break the improvisation. Then Earth would fall like all the others. The new strategy was elegant. No deep advances. No exposed supply lines. No pursuit into abandoned terrain. Instead, the ascendancy would hold. They fortified captured zones with layered defenses, orbital overwatch, and sensor webs so dense that nothing larger than a bird, or so they believed, could pass undetected. The humans would be starved of targets. Denied momentum. Denied hope. For a brief moment, it worked. Human attacks slowed. Signals went quiet. Ambushes ceased. Karuan commanders breathed easier. Varesh allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. There, he said, they have exhausted themselves. The strategist did not answer. Because the humans had not stopped. They had simply changed shape. In the ruins of what had once been a hospital complex, Dr. Mirachan knelt beside a wounded Karuan soldier. He was young by their standards. His armor had been breached by falling debris, not a weapon. His breathing was shallow, uneven. Her team watched in tense silence. "You don't have to," one whispered. Chun shook her head. "He's hurt," she said. "That's enough." She applied a pressure seal, adjusted for alien physiology she'd learned through months of observation and captured medical texts. The Karuan's eyes fluttered open. Fear surged, then confusion, then something far worse. Hope. The Ascendancy's fortified zones began reporting anomalies. Not attacks. Interactions. Unarmed Terran groups approaching perimeters under white flags. Civilians leaving supplies near sensor blind spots. Medical aid rendered to wounded scouts left behind after skirmishes. At first, commanders assumed deception. Then they captured footage. Humans sharing water. Humans lifting rubble off trapped Karuan. Humans mourning their dead alongside alien corpses. Varesh watched one such recording in silence. A Terran soldier stood beside a fallen Karuan trooper, helmet removed, head bowed. The feed cut. Varesh exhaled slowly. "This is psychological warfare," he said. "Yes," the strategist replied, "but not against us." Captured Karuan soldiers began returning. Released, fed, treated, given time to recover. They spoke of humans who refused to strike when they could have. Of laughter shared in broken translations. Of children asking what their homes looked like. The Ascendancy interrogation chambers grew crowded and uneasy. "These reports are contaminations," a counselor snapped. "They are experiences," another replied softly. On Earth, General Reyes received an unexpected message. A Karuan commander requested a meeting. Unarmed. She considered for exactly 12 seconds. "Bring him in." They met in the skeletal remains of a university hall. The Karuan was taller than any human in the room. His armor bore scars of battle, but his posture was restrained. "I am Commander Threx," he said carefully. "I seek understanding." Reyes studied him. "Understanding doesn't stop orbital strikes," she replied. "No," Threx said, "but misunderstanding prolongs them." Silence stretched between them. "You could kill me," Threx added. "Yes," Reyes said. "You don't." Reyes leaned back. "No," she agreed. Threx spoke of Karuan history, of species encountered and conquered, of resistance measured in predictable curves, of empires that broke when shown inevitability. "You do not break," he said. "You adapt." Reyes folded her hands. "We don't see survival as a math problem," she said. "It's a story, and we're very stubborn about how it ends." The fortified zones began to rot from within. Not through sabotage, through hesitation. Karuan patrols delayed firing. Commanders questioned strike orders near civilian clusters. Soldiers remembered human medics. Sensors still worked. Weapons still fired. But certainty was gone. Varesh slammed his claw against the command dais. "They are infecting us," he roared. "With mercy," the strategist replied. Varesh stared. "That is not a weapon." "No," the strategist said. "It is a mirror." The ascendancy escalated again. Not tactically, philosophically. A broadcast was prepared galaxy-wide, declaring humanity a destabilizing anomaly, a species too dangerous to coexist with. Earth's destruction was framed not as conquest, but necessity. Varesh authorized it. The message spread. The galaxy listened. And then humans responded, not with outrage, with memory. They broadcast their own message. Not demands, not threats, stories of first fires, of lost cities, of wars survived and lessons learned too late. They showed footage of humans rebuilding after disasters, of enemies becoming allies, of children born in shelters laughing anyway. They showed the Karuan soldier Dr. Chun had saved alive. The message ended with a simple line: "We have been monsters before. We choose not to be again." The response across the galaxy was not immediate, but it was profound. Neutral systems hesitated. Trade lanes closed. Allies reconsidered treaties. The ascendancy's moral authority, the silent foundation of its expansion, began to crack. Varesh watched council channels flood with dissent. "This was never supposed to be questioned," he whispered. The strategist replied quietly, "They question because humans taught them how." On Earth, Lawson's unit received new orders. Not to attack, to withdraw visibly. They left behind supplies, medical kits, messages carved into stone in a dozen languages. Lawson lingered, carving one last word before leaving. "Remember." The Karuan advanced into empty territory again. But this time, they hesitated. And that hesitation cost them more than any ambush ever had. Varesh stood alone in the command chamber, staring at the burning projection of Earth. It no longer looked like prey. It looked like a challenge his empire had never faced. An enemy that learned, that endured, that refused to become what it fought. For the first time in his long career, Varesh asked a forbidden question. What if victory is impossible? Empires do not concede. They collapse, they fracture, they burn, but they do not choose to stop. And so the Karuan ascendancy prepared its final act. The council convened in total secrecy, shielded from both Terran observation and internal dissent. The chamber's atmosphere shimmered with defensive fields layered upon one another like paranoid thoughts. High Commander Varesh stood at the center. "The anomaly persists," he said. "Containment has failed. Moral isolation has failed. Tactical dominance has failed." Silence followed. Then a counselor spoke the unthinkable. "Then Earth must be erased. Not conquered. Erased." The weapon had been designed centuries ago, a theoretical solution to theoretical threats. It would not crack the planet or scorch its surface. It would strip it. Atmosphere, oceans, magnetosphere. Earth would remain. Silent, dead, and forever unusable. A warning carved into space-time. Varesh authorized the mobilization with a trembling claw. This was not strategy. It was fear wearing the mask of certainty. Humanity learned of the weapon 12 hours before activation. Not through espionage, through confession. A Karuan data courier defected, broadcasting everything he knew before self-terminating to avoid recapture. The room in which General Reyes received the message was painfully quiet. 12 hours. No defense. No counterstrike. No evacuation on a planetary scale. Just 12 hours. "What do we do?" someone asked. Reyes closed her eyes and smiled. "Exactly what we've always done," she said. "We choose who we are." Humanity did not scramble weapons. They opened archives. Every ship that could still transmit did so, not with targeting data but records, scientific research, cultural histories, music, art, languages. Earth began to speak, not as a fortress but as a memory. Dr. Mirachan stood in a broadcast studio, hands steady despite the knowledge that she was speaking to the galaxy for the last time. "If you're hearing this," she said softly, Then you know what's coming. She inhaled. We're not asking to be saved. A pause. We're asking to be remembered. The signal flooded hyperspace, across neutral systems, into Allied archives, even into Ascendancy data vaults before sensors could react. The galaxy listened. On the surface of Earth, there was no panic. Families gathered. Cities dimmed their lights. Old enemies held hands. Captain Lawson stood on a hill overlooking a valley she'd fought in for months. Her second approached quietly. They're ready. Lawson nodded. Good, she said. Then so am I. At Ascendancy Command, Varesh watched the data stream with growing horror. They are not resisting, he whispered. They are bearing witness. The strategist stood beside him, voice heavy. They are making themselves immortal. Something unprecedented happened. A neutral coalition fleet moved, not to attack the Ascendancy, but to block the weapons activation zone. Another followed, then another. Messages poured in. Withdraw. Stand down. This will not be your legacy. Varesh felt the weight of history press down on him. For the first time, the Ascendancy was outnumbered, not in ships, but in belief. The council chamber erupted in argument. This is insubordination. This is collapse. This is contamination. Varesh raised his claw. No, he said quietly. This is consequence. The final countdown reached its last minute. Earth's signal intensified. Children singing. Voices telling stories. A final message from General Reyes. We were never afraid of dying, she said. Only of becoming something unworthy of survival. Varesh looked at the projection of Earth. He saw not a target, but a mirror, and mirrors were dangerous. With 10 seconds remaining, Varesh did the unthinkable. He issued a counterorder. Abort. The weapon powered down. The galaxy held its breath, then exhaled. The Ascendancy did not celebrate. Neither did humanity, because something had ended, and something else had begun. Varesh resigned that day, not in disgrace, in understanding. He transmitted a final message to Earth. Teach us. It read, if you still will. Earth answered, not with triumph, with an invitation. The galaxy did not celebrate the silence. Silence, after all, was what followed extinction. Instead, the galaxy listened. In the hours after the Ascendancy's weapon powered down, no victory declarations were issued. No triumphant broadcasts flooded the stars. Fleets held position. Governments hesitated. Historians began writing not conclusions, but questions. What had nearly happened to Earth was not unique in its scale. What stopped it was, on Earth, dawn came softly. Cities that had expected their last sunrise found themselves bathed in fragile gold. Birds still flew. Oceans still breathed. Children who had gone to sleep believing the world would end woke to something stranger. Tomorrow, General Naomi Reyes stood alone on the balcony of the Provisional Command Center, watching the light creep across shattered skylines and untouched forests alike. She felt no triumph, only weight. Humanity did not surge outward in retaliation. They did not demand reparations. They did not posture. They rebuilt, as they always had. The first official meeting between humanity and the Karuan Ascendancy did not take place aboard a warship or in a throne hall. It took place on neutral ground, a quiet station orbiting a dead moon, chosen not for symbolism, but for safety. Commander Threx arrived unarmed. So did the humans. High Commander Varesh did not attend. Instead, he transmitted a statement to both sides. We believed endurance was measured in conquest. You taught us it is measured in restraint. We mistook inevitability for strength, and nearly destroyed something irreplaceable. He stepped down permanently that day, not because he was defeated, but because he had learned. The Ascendancy withdrew from Earth system in full, not in retreat, in acknowledgement. Borders were redrawn, treaties rewritten, expansion doctrines dismantled. For the first time in its history, the Ascendancy accepted a limitation, not imposed by force but by example. Other powers noticed. So did smaller species who had long feared the stars. Humanity became something unexpected. Not rulers, Not conquerors, not saviors, witnesses, advisors. The species that had stared annihilation in the face and chosen dignity over survival at any cost. That choice echoed. Captain Lawson returned to the valley she had fought over for months. The traps were gone. The scars remained. She planted a small marker where friends had fallen. Not for glory, but for memory. Her second stood beside her. "Do you think they'll remember us?" he asked. Lawson smiled faintly. "They already are," she said. Dr. Mira Chun continued her work, now alongside Kruan physicians. They disagreed often. They learned constantly. One evening, a young Kruan asked her a question no algorithm had ever posed. "Why did you help us?" he asked. "When you believed you would die?" Chun considered. "Because if we survived by becoming monsters," she said, "we wouldn't have survived at all." Across the galaxy, historians struggled to name what had happened. It was not a victory, not a defeat, not even a stalemate. It was a revelation that intelligence alone did not define greatness, that power without conscience was fragile, that adaptability, empathy, and stubborn hope could bend the future more effectively than fleets ever could. Earth rejoined the galactic community slowly, carefully, on its own terms. Humans spoke often of failure, of their own past wars, mistakes, extinctions narrowly avoided. They did not present themselves as flawless. They presented themselves as unfinished. And somehow that made all the difference. Years later, a Kruan cadet would study the invasion of Earth and ask their instructor, "Why didn't the humans destroy us when they could have?" The instructor would pause and answer with a phrase now carved into the archives of multiple civilizations. "Because humans don't fight to prove they are stronger. They fight to prove they are still human." The galaxy learned many things from that war, but one lesson endured above all others: that survival is not the act of outlasting your enemy, but of refusing to lose yourself in the process. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. If the story moved you, subscribe HFY Story Vault for more human stories from the stars.